Our gospel for today is from Luke chapter 24, verses 1 through 12. It's found on page 68 in your New Testament if you'd like to follow along. Hear the good news for this Easter. But on the first day of the week, at early dawn, they came to the tomb, taking spices that they had prepared. They found the stone rolled away from the tomb. But when they went in, they did not find the body. While they were perplexed about this, suddenly two men in dazzling clothes stood beside them. The women were terrified and bowed their faces to the ground, but the men said to them, "Why do you look for the living among the dead? He is not here, but is risen." Give me a second. Remember how he told you, while he was still in Galilee, that the Son of Man must be handed over to sinners, and must be crucified, and on the third day rise again. Then they remembered his words. And returning from the tomb, they told all this to the 11 and to all the rest. Now it was Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Mary the mother of James, and the other women with them who told this to the apostles. But these words seemed to them an idle tale, and they did not believe them. But Peter got up and ran to the tomb, stooping and looking in. He saw the linen cloths by themselves. Then he went home, amazed at what had happened. This is our good news for this Easter. Please pray with me. May the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be pleasing in your sight, O God, my rock and my redeemer. Amen. Grace and peace to you from God, our Creator, and our Savior and friend, Jesus Christ. Amen. In seminary, I had a New Testament professor that had a long white beard and a very gravelly voice. When he spoke, you listened, and if he said your name, you immediately thought you were in trouble, whether you were or not. By his lectures, you could tell that he had dissected every part of the Gospels, line for line, and there was no theory that he had not considered. He took studying the Bible very, very seriously. I don't know that I ever saw Professor Smith make a joke about the Bible ever. He was a serious Bible scholar. But one day during a lecture, a friend of mine, Ralph, surprised this professor with a new theory. And I've since named it the Pretty Jesus Theory. My friend began, there sure were a lot of women following Jesus. Professor Smith responded, there sure were, Ralph. Ralph went on, could it be possible that Jesus was just really, really attractive? While Ralph's theory was floating out there in the silence, Professor Smith just studied Ralph. More so, stared at him. And that awkwardness, you know the awkwardness that I'm talking about, it just kind of hovered for quite a while. And then he finally answered, you know, Ralph, I can honestly say I've never considered that. Now, don't get me wrong, I think the Pretty Jesus Theory is maybe worthy of a paper, I don't know. But the real truth is that we don't know what to do with women in the Bible, with women of that ancient period. We know how many times they were viewed as little more than property. So we approach the subject cautiously. But our failing on this topic about women in the ancient world has led to greater foolishness. We drop this story from Luke because we think we have an easy answer for why the women are there at the tomb. Many consider it the greatest proof of Jesus' resurrection. For if you were going to invent a story about someone coming back from the dead, it's believed you would absolutely not have women as witnesses. For listen to how the other disciples hear their story. These words seemed to them an idle tale, and they did not believe them. The disciples were not particularly chauvinistic or misogynistic. I mean, they were, but they were just speaking from the time. In those days, from a legal perspective, the testimony of a woman was largely not trusted. So if you were inventing a story about the resurrection, you would have Peter and John and some other secular officials there as reliable witnesses. But that's not how our gospel tells this story. Instead, it's argued, we have a credible story because no one in their like mind would make up a story where women are the witnesses. So it must have actually happened like this. And then we leave Mary, Joanna, Mary, and the other women as that. Nothing more than an interesting proof. But is that really all there is to their story? Luke, our gospel writer, clearly thinks different. For a start, when you think about this scene at the tomb, think about who the women meet at the tomb. Who is there? How many people? 2, right? This is the only gospel that has 2 people there at the tomb. And the reason for it is that it's trying to connect us back to another story. Another story that we are amazed about. A story where Jesus is on a mountaintop and he is glowing. We see him for the God that he is. We call it the Transfiguration story. And there are hints here in the story. We don't see it because, well, they're not on a mountaintop and we end up being pretty literal people. But how are the 2 people described? They're dazzling. Their clothes are dazzling. Just like Jesus shining on the mountaintop. And what else? We have 2 people. Every other gospel has just one. Either one angel or a boy. Never is there 2. These 2 men are believed to be the same 2 people who were on the mountaintop earlier with Jesus. They are Moses and Elijah. These men that were supposed to have only appeared to those all-important men, Jesus, Peter, John, and James, yet here are Moses and Elijah with these supposedly unimportant women. And then Moses and Elijah remind them, remember how he told you while he was still in Galilee. They don't say, remember what Jesus told Peter, John, and James, or remember what Jesus told the disciples. Jesus had told these women everything that was to happen. They were part of his inner circle. They may not be counted among the 12, but these women are disciples. And then Moses and Elijah suddenly stop their speech. In every other gospel, the angels or the boy, the angel or the boy, they tell the women to report back to the disciples all that they have seen and heard. But not here. Mary, Joanna, and Mary are not errand runners for the disciples. Let me say it again. They are the disciples. They did not flock to Jesus because he was pretty, or because some wiser man told them they should, but they went to Jesus because he held the power of eternal life in his hands. Yet somehow in this story, as told by Luke, Peter is the hero. He gets the last word, or more so, the last action. But Peter stood up and ran to the tomb, stooping and looking in. He saw the linen clothes by themselves, then he went home, amazed at what had happened. It's Peter's amazement that is valuable. Why? When I was an agnostic in Italy, I felt God speak to me through a Franciscan friar. He said things to me he shouldn't have been able to know. Only God could have done it. It was a divine moment in which I became absolutely confident that God was real and God wanted to be involved in our lives. You've heard me tell you that a number of times. But there's another part of the story that I don't know about what happened after. About when I came back to my real life, my regular life. What I did was nothing. I kept my newfound knowledge to myself. I kept my new understanding of God to myself. I told no one. I knew that the only way that I could have come to believe in all of this Christian stuff was through some miraculous event. Not through some preachy guy standing in front of me in a button-down shirt and a tie telling me stuff that happened to him. Why would anyone believe me? If I were them, I wouldn't have. So I kept silent. What I did was basically the equivalent of the women coming back from speaking to Moses, Elijah, coming back from learning that Jesus had been raised from the dead, and speaking to the disciples. And the disciples said, "What did you experience?" And they say, "Nothing much." It sounds crazy to imagine them doing that, but that's basically what I did. I said nothing. People started seeing a change in me, a change in my behavior, a change in how I treated others. I seemed calmer now. Things seemed to affect me less. But when they asked me why I had changed, why I had experienced what I had experienced, I would just skirt around the issue. It's like my grandma Mimi. Every time we went on a mission trip, she would buy one of our church t-shirts, but she would never wear it. Because it always had a Bible verse on the back, and she didn't want to be preachy. She wanted to support the youth group, but didn't want to be preachy. So I'm pretty sure, I haven't looked in her dresser lately, but I'm pretty sure they're in the back somewhere of her dresser. But we have seen the evils of that. People that beat people over the head with Jesus. We don't want to be those kinds of Christians, so we keep silent. Or at least we try. But that's when the miracles started happening. God doesn't let you keep silent. Over and over, questions kept coming to me. My friends were struggling for meaning. They'd bring it up to me and I'd say, "Man, that's tough." And then add nothing else. Strangers, literal strangers, over and over again. I'm not saying 1 or 2 times this happened. I'm talking 50, 60 times. Random strangers walking up to me, asking me, who they don't know, real personal questions and asking for advice about God. I saw people absolutely greedy for the divine. And I just shrugged. Why would they listen to me? Why were my words more important than anyone else? I started to realize I had a bullseye on my back. I could no longer ignore what God had given to me, what God calls all of us to do. We can run from the truth that claims us. We can hide in the belly of a whale if we want to. But when God has a purpose for you, when the creator of all there is wants you to share something, guess what you're going to do? The women in the gospel knew their situation. They knew how they were perceived better than we do. They knew that if they told this story, they'd be written off as careless women spinning tall tales. The Bible tells us that very thing happened. But these words seemed to them an idle tale, and they did not believe them. Yet these brave women, these brave disciples, spoke up anyway. The thing about the divine is that you never know who is listening or whose ears God might be opening to hear. So when people kept asking, and asking and asking. I finally started answering. They would ask, how can you believe in a God when there is so much suffering in this world? And I would tell them, I believe in the only God that I could possibly believe in. A God that suffered with us. A God that was on the cross and said, my God, why have you forsaken me? A God that feels what it feels like to be alone. To wonder if there's anyone up there. I believe in the only God that I could possibly believe in. How can you trust the Bible when it seemingly gets so many things wrong? It can't even agree how many people were at the tomb when Jesus was resurrected. I trust in the Bible because of the disciples. Disciples like Peter, who denied and denied and denied Jesus, who did not want to be connected with him, who did everything in his power to not be lined up with this man because he did not want to die. But then fast forward later, and he's willing to die rather than betray this same man that he denied. Something happened in that middle. That is the proof of this Bible witness. That these fallible disciples that couldn't quite get it, that ran away when things got rough, chose to die rather than do it again. The toughest question. How can I trust in a God that I've never seen to be there on the other side of death for those that I love, for myself? You can trust because God has already come to me on this side of life. God has already come to so many others on this side of life, like these women at the tomb. You can trust because God has not forgotten me, and God will never forget you. Peter is the hero of this story because he was able to hear the good news spoken by the true disciples, the women. Peter is the hero because we need to understand how desperately our message is needed in the darkness of this world. Where would Peter's life have ended if he had never seen the empty tomb? Peter is the hero because we need to understand that our success is secured. Let's just say it. Peter is a screw-up. He got everything wrong. Over and over and over again, yet he's still the hero of the story. Because God is writing this story. God chose Peter, chose us to be God's children. We are part of that successful story. The Peters of this world are waiting to hear. They are waiting for you to speak. For all of us present today, are not the Peters of this story. Maybe at one point we were, when everybody knew the story and could hear it with clean ears, but it's no longer like that. We are the women. The women that followed Jesus, not because he was so pretty, but because there was no other way. The truth has found us in the darkness, and it has led us back to the world with a story to tell. Try to hide. Try to keep silent. And the very rocks at your feet will cry out. Jesus Christ is risen.
He is risen indeed. Hallelujah.